Have you ever been told to follow a dialogue rule only to watch a published author break it? You probably thought, are they even allowed to break those rules? The answer is yes. Just like everything else in writing, once you understand a rule, you can break it as long as it has a purpose. Today we're talking about a few of those rules in dialogue and when you're allowed to break them. Let's get started. Hey guys, Nour here and welcome back to my channel. I feel like writers are divided on whether they enjoy writing dialogue or find it a torture. I personally love writing dialogue, and the more I learn about it, the more it becomes easier to write. But I suppose that's the case with everything. But even if, actually, especially if you hate writing dialogue, this video will make the process so much easier for you to tackle. You've probably heard of dialogue rules like keep it natural, give each speaker their own paragraph, make sure the reader knows who's speaking, and so on. While those are great and don't ever change, other dialogue rules can change depending on the circumstance. Using said 100% of the time. You've probably heard of this rule. Even Stephen King advises to stick to only using said as a dialogue tag in writing. The reason this rule exists is because we want our readers immersed in the story. And typically, when readers see he said, she said, or I said, their eyes skip over them, which keeps the dialogue sounding real in their head. In other words, the reader would visualize who's speaking and hear them saying the words. And the dialogue tag only becomes a guide in the background. Whereas, if we were to write, I have no idea, I replied, then the reader's subconscious mind pauses at the words, I replied, for a second too long. As a result, they are no longer immersed in the dialogue. They hear the dialogue tag loud in their mind rather than glancing over it and leaving it in the background of their thoughts. Now, while this rule is to avoid all other dialogue tags that are not a simple I said, he said, she said, there are times to break the rule. Sometimes people don't just say something, sometimes they whisper it, or they mutter it, or they shout it. So, in those instances, writing that someone said something would be false. And that's when you're allowed to break the rule. I have no idea, I whispered. Use this sparingly, meaning only use it when the scene requires it, and not just because you're bored of saying the word said. And keep in mind, you don't have to use a dialogue tag every time a person speaks. In fact, you should only use a dialogue tag to indicate who's speaking if the reader won't figure it out based on the scene. I won't go into all of that, but I do have an older video that goes more in depth on the topic. I'll leave that in the card here. Another dialogue rule is to always keep speech consistent when the same character is speaking. For example, our character in chapter 1 should still have the same manner of talking as when we see them in chapter 20. This is because we want writing to sound natural and true to the person we're writing about. But here's when you should break that rule. If we ever see our character as a child in a flashback, they should obviously not have the same style of speech as they do when they're older. And their vocabulary might not be as diverse. And they might not speak with the same confidence. They might not even have the same personality when talking. For instance, some people become sarcastic as they age. So our child protagonist might not have cultivated his sarcasm yet. Then we have another instance where this dialogue rule may be broken. What if a person's line of work requires them to speak differently? A doctor must speak differently to his patients than he would to his family, friends, and children. Some people act professional in certain scenarios, but then they drop the act when they're around their friends and family, and they start using cuss words to lighten the mood. You get the point. And last but not least, another dialogue rule is breaking up dialogue with action. This is a great rule to follow, but not all the time. And here's why. The reason we have this rule is because we don't want page after page of just dialogue and no idea of who's doing what or who's reacting a certain way. We want to see the way someone gets angry at hearing certain news. We want to see how someone chastises someone else. Those show personality and make the scene exciting. However, breaking up dialogue with action just for the sake of doing so isn't always wise. Because then we might end up with action that pulls us out of the scene and makes us wonder why the author thought it was so important for us to know all that information. For example, let's take a look at this dialogue in action. I keep telling her not to listen to me. I sat down and crossed my legs. But she keeps ignoring my advice. It's her fault then. I jumped back up and smiled. Wouldn't you agree with me, Thomas? I patted him on the shoulder. The dialogue is broken up with action, but the action itself isn't that great. Our character sat down, then jumped back up, and I did that for the sole reason of breaking up the dialogue. But it didn't need to be broken up here. In fact, the scene would have been much better if I'd made it, I keep telling her not to listen to me, but she keeps ignoring my advice. It's her fault then. Wouldn't you agree with me, Thomas? I patted him on the shoulder. Some writers even make the action ridiculous in an attempt to break up the dialogue. And then you'll find characters sneezing, coughing, and even scratching their nose. If the action doesn't move the story forward, don't include it. Or better yet, rethink the scene and add action that makes a difference in the story when you use it to break up the dialogue. So, these are some dialogue rules that can be broken if done as advised. Have you ever broken any of these dialogue rules before? I'd love to know. And before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sarah Frayne from my shoutouts here over on Patreon, as well as all my amazing other patrons. You guys are so awesome. Thank you so much for your support. And if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe for weekly writing advice videos. And don't forget to follow me on social media to see what I'm up to from day to day and just chat with me. And remember, Nour for president!